This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening, everybody, and I hope you're well on this wonderful evening. Really interesting show tonight. Exclusion, is it ever okay? Is the topic. I've got two fantastic guests coming up for you imminently. I thought before doing that, I'd take the opportunity to say happy Diwali to everybody out there who is celebrating Diwali today. And obviously I'm going to also run through some of the sponsors for this show in just a moment's time. Obviously one of our supporters of all of our shows is with the Slack group. I know that Nathan, who is very kindly administrating the space today, will very soon pin a tweet from With the Slack group so you can find out more about them. But one of the things that With the Slack group is a provider of specialist education and care. They're one of the leading providers of that across the country, with many schools on offer. And they also have a careers page. And on the careers page, you can actually find out more about all the jobs and opportunities that are available through With the Slack group. So as I say, they're pinned now to the space. So if you want to get involved, for example, in their virtual neurodiversity conference, then you're invited to do so, and you can register on the link at the top of the space. The other one that I wanted to mention before we kicked off was Darren Leslie and his podcast. If you haven't listened to the Becoming Educated podcast yet, then I highly recommend heading over there onto your podcast provider and checking it out. If you want to know the secrets to great teaching in classrooms, Becoming Educated is the podcast for you. You've got interviews with guests where they investigate the hallmarks of great teaching, topics ranging from discovering effective study strategies or empowering techniques for every classroom. Search for Becoming Educated wherever you get your podcast from. There's nearly 100 episodes there already, and there's a brand new one out that was just out yesterday as well, which is well worth checking out. So without further ado, Lewis Ellis has joined me. Lewis, you just need to click unmute bottom left, hopefully with a bit of luck.
Oh, yeah.
Good evening, sir. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Well, first of all, I want to say thanks very much for giving up the time to come onto this show tonight. I'm really excited to talk to you. And I know everybody listening live and listening back will also be very excited. Lewis, just to give a little bit of I'll give you a little introduction and then maybe pass it over to you for a little bit more. You can fill in the details and the blanks. But essentially, Lewis is I'm going to call you a marketing expert. Certainly we'll call you a marketeer. And you have also been a finalist on BBC Apprentice. If you've seen that, then Lewis was a finalist, I think, in 2019. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one. And since then, he has set up his own marketing agency called Hustle, which does loads of really interesting things, which we'll kind of probably touch on during the course of this interview. And the reason that I've asked Lewis on specifically is because you were excluded from school, Lewis, before all of this happened. So I thought that will be obviously something we will discuss in the course of this interview, talking about why that happened, what happened, how it happened, and your kind of thoughts on education in general. But before we do anything else, can you tell me a little bit about the story up to the point when you went on The Apprentice?
Yeah, sure. Clear my throat. Choking. I'm quitting smoking, by the way.
Good.
So, it means I've swapped to a vape. All that means is that I'm short of breath. I get loads of vape juice in my throat, and I eat a lot of chocolate, which is not great. So I'm getting tits, and I'm still smoking something. So I don't know what the point in this is. Anyway, up to the point of apprentice. Okay, cool. So basically, it's quite a long thing, right? So when I got apprentice, I was 29 years old. 29 years, okay. I was in school, normal high school, so Basildon High, if anyone knows it. I was all right. I was just I was a student that sort of skated by. Like, I didn't really try, but I seemed to get good grades, and it seemed to piss off all the teachers. You know, like they'd expect me to fail, and then I'd just smash an exam without paying attention. So I was all right at school, and then I went to college. I sort of started losing my way a little bit. Didn't really find anything interesting or exciting. I ended up getting kicked out of 3 colleges actually. So I got kicked out of sixth form first because we were doing psychology, and I mean that just wasn't for me. Then I went to do a sports BTEC at a college in Bury. They kicked me out because apparently turning up drunk to run athletics on the all-weather pitch isn't the smartest move. So yeah, I didn't get through there. And I went to Burnley before I dropped out of that like 2 months in, and that was it. I was on my way to becoming a bum, and I guess offering myself out in the park for 20 pence. So
like, let's just rewind slightly up to like 16. You said like, I mean, what were you like at school? Were you good? Were you? What were you like? Were you this like larger than life character that people who saw The Apprentice or watched, seeing you in that capacity might think you are, or were you more like shy? Were you as confident then as you are now?
No, I would say I was relatively. I was a loud personality, but I wasn't confident or anything. It was actually, I did Latin and ballroom dancing. I was in an all boys choir. What else did I do? I was in scouts. I got all my badges. I was basically quite well behaved. I used to like do I don't know, I just like to do lots of different activities and hobbies and learning and things like that. And then in the evenings, me and my friends, we weren't bad lads. We just used to like sort of wreak havoc in the area. We weren't chavs. We used to hate the chavs. The chavs used to chase us around and try and beat us up. I'd say I was more of a skater. Used to hang around skate parks.
Oh, skater boy.
Try and like listen to Green Day back in the day, Good Charlotte and stuff like that. So I don't know. I guess I didn't really fit anywhere. But yeah. So I wasn't. The main thing is like I wasn't particularly bad or anything. And in school, although I was I would say I was quite loud and disruptive. There you go. Quite disruptive and distracting, I imagine, quite a lot of the time. But I wasn't what you call like a bad kid or anything like that.
Yeah. And then obviously you said that you went to college. Now, the reason I'm asking you all these questions about your school experience is I kind of want to get on to like, I was going to ask, because you're a very creative person and your kind of like endeavors since then seem to have all, even when I chatted to you the other week, because I met Lewis at like a networking event the other week, and we very briefly talked about some of the stuff you've done, and it's all very kind of like outside the box, really creative. I wonder whether like your school, like your education, I won't even say school, I'll just say like education experience. Do you think that it in any way helped you to along that path, or do you think it was like just totally disconnected from that?
It was a polar opposite. It was actually very restricting. I literally, if I'd listened to what I was being told in school, I honestly wouldn't have gone on to do anything that I found interesting in life. It was only when I reached out to, I'll fast forward a few. I'll go back to this later on, but I basically started reaching out to entrepreneurs myself because I wasn't fitting in anywhere, and I'd write letters and emails, and that carried on until I was a little bit older, even through into university as well. So I used to seek advice from people that I respected. Not to say I don't respect teachers, but I just didn't think they got me, and I was. So the word excluded, you said it right at the beginning. I mean, excluded means a lot. It doesn't mean a lot of different things, but usually seen as like a big red thing, like it's really, really bad. But I mean, I was more ostracized than excluded. I was more just like, teachers used to just dislike me. I could tell that straight away. Anyway, so I didn't.
But why is that though? Why did you think that?
100% because that's not the way it was done back then. Like literally, I'm only 32, right? But even I remember that I don't know. I think we had an entrepreneur program. It was a piss take. No one really cared about it. I think what we did was made CDs and sold them in the school, and I tried to get involved in that, and I just thought, this is ridiculous. This isn't creative. This is just trying to make some extra money for their teachers. I don't know. I imagine the staff party, but but it wasn't taken seriously. Like even when I was in school at 16, well, even younger than that, 14, 13, 14, and also the fact that I'm from quite a poor family. Mum was me, 2 sisters and a brother, and she also adopted my 2 cousins because my uncle medically wasn't able to look after them. So we had seven of us in a house on a single parent's wage, and she's not particularly skilled either or qualified. So the money was very low. So I've never been around these circles. So when I was at school, there was no sort of push towards you can make money, you can do this. It's more about get good grades and get a job. And then I was reading lots of books and listening to people speak, and that didn't quite compute. And then my family, obviously them circles and my extended family, no one was available to sort of lean on and learn from in that respect in terms of, going on to start a business and whatnot. So I just sort of felt like a loner. That makes sense. My entire
Yeah, no,
school.
totally. Yeah, totally. I mean, that's an interesting point you made about school not having any avenue for your sort of entrepreneurship, business mind, all that kind of stuff. I mean, was business studies available? Was there
You
anything
know
like
what?
that?
To be honest, it wasn't even back then. It didn't even. I don't know if you. Obviously, there's a lot of teachers here, right? I don't know if you
Yeah.
recognise. You see someone back now. You know what ADHD is, right? Now you know when someone's just learns differently, doesn't learn from textbooks, learns visually.
Yeah.
I was a visual learner. I like to do things, and I would get very creative. For example, when I was in school, I was arrested in year 10. Sorry, I don't know what age I was. I think it was like 13. I
Yeah.
was arrested because I planned a heist. So what I did was I'd found these keys to a dumper truck. The internet had just been more or less coming online at school. We had IT classes. So whilst I was in IT, I went online. I found out how to drive this dumper truck. I got all the kids in school. I got about 20 of them. Gave them all walkie-talkies. Drew a map. Put them all on street corners and said, right, I'm going to drive it from point A to point B. We're going to heist this dumper truck. We're going to take it to the quarry, and we're going to play on it.
Oh my
And
goodness.
everyone's like, yeah, because obviously it's a small town. There's no one around to, there's nothing else to do, right? So everyone's in on this plan. So I learned how to drive it. You know, I practiced for like an hour, and then on the day before, and then on the day, jumped on it, set off driving. All the kids were in position. They're all talking on the walkie-talkies, and literally, as soon as I pulled out onto the main road, a police car just happened to be going past, and immediately pulled over the 12, 13-year-old boy that was driving a JCB
Oh
digger down
my
the road.
God.
And anyway, I got arrested, and it was around the time that Niz Loppy song came out. It was like,
Yeah, the
do you
JCB
remember it?
song.
Yeah, the JCB
I love that song.
Well, that was my theme tune, apparently. But what I was going to say was,
but what was the point? What was the point of that though? Was that just have a laugh?
This is my point of the story. So you would look at that and go, Jesus, he's a bad kid. I mean, when my mum came to get me, she was really shocked. I can't believe you stole a dumper truck. Everyone in school, they put me, they put me to the side, like, and started looking like I was a problem child. But really, all you do is look at him and go, that was very clever, wasn't it? That was quite creative. Like, for 12 years old, I mean, even now, I look at 12 years old, to learn how to drive it, plan it, draw a map, get all the students involved, plan, like, and obviously it was just me being mischievous that, and then it went from there. But it was actually being really creative. But the point I'm trying to get across is that's how my creativity would, exude. That's the things. That's the things I would get up to. It would all just be cheeky and mischievous. Because I didn't know business was a thing. I had nowhere to harness it. I hadn't learned any skills. So really all I was doing was just, well, what if we do this and do that and do this? And I come up with all these ideas and, and that you look at that and think that's quite bad. But actually, if you'd asked me back then, I'd be like, well, what, you learned how to drive a heavy piece of machinery. You got all the kids in school. You gave them walkie-talkies. You planned this route. I just thought, back then, that's ADHD, right? All day long. And it still is now affecting me. But
so with that, let's just go back to the ADHD thing. Is that something you've been diagnosed with? Is that something that you think you are ADHD? Is that something that you have to manage now? I mean, where does that come into the story, sort of thing?
Well, back then it wasn't a thing, right? So it never really got diagnosed. So I say I'm ADHD. I could just be a weirdo. But I've read and spoken to people, and I've read. I basically hit every single symptom, literally every single one of them. And I now know that I have it, but I don't think going to the doctor would be. What's the point? Like, I don't struggle. I don't need to have medication. I just know that would explain a lot of the things that I did in school that were perceived as naughty or distracting. When actually it was just I had no outlet for the things I wanted to do, and I had all this energy. Another example would be.
But interesting though. Sorry, go on. I'll let you finish your story because I want to ask you something else. Go on.
I was going to say I've got all these really weird stories that when I talk about them, I'm like, Jesus, I was so weird. Okay, so I came up with this plan in school where I found these smoke bombs at the shop, and you light them. I don't know if anyone's seen them. They sort of smolder, and as they smolder, they start to smoke. So what we would do every evening is we would go around and put them on the front of the cars inside the grill, and we'd like let them smolder, let the smoke go out, knock on the door, and tell the people that the car's on fire, and watch their reaction as they tried to put the car out. And we used to think it was hilarious. And then we tried it on the bus on the way home from school. And what happened was it filled the bus very quickly with smoke. And so the driver goes mental and says, we're going back to school. He's freaking out thinking we started a fire. We're all laughing our asses off because we think it's hilarious because obviously there's no fire and it's a harmless prank. The kids at the back of the bus think there's actually a fire. So they opened the fire exit, and what you would have seen at that moment if you'd been walking past was 2 or 3 kids jumping out of the back of a moving bus, smoke billowing out both sides of this bus, and the driver screaming at the kids in the back. It must have looked an absolute picture. But that's the sort of things that it's just mayhem and mischief. Yeah. But
do you think there's anything school or college could have done differently to channel your kind of way of thinking or your way of acting?
Well, this is the thing now is you guys do, right? You do recognize when someone's a different learner. You do recognize when someone's a bit different. You do recognize when someone's, if they're naughty, it's not just because they're naughty, there might be a reason behind it. Or, I don't know. I just feel like there's a lot more now in terms of understanding. Yes. But back then you were just, I say I wasn't a bad kid, but I probably was seen by a lot of teachers as naughty kid. I was probably hated by a lot of teachers as well, I imagine, because I used to be really annoying in class. Which is even weirder because when they did the apprentice thing, they actually went back to school and asked the teacher. That kicked me out of form, by the way.
Really?
Wouldn't let me come back for like 2 years. I she had like a breakdown and started screaming, shouting and crying at me. I didn't even do anything that day, by the way. And they put her on TV, and then she was talking about how like she was really nice about me, and I was like, nah, what? I was so confused. So I think you look back with rose-tinted glasses, don't you, really? But when I think about it, I just feel like there wasn't any. I don't know if you guys are like, I'm 32. How old everyone here is? But do you remember what school was like? I just feel like
I mean, I'm 37, so I completely empathise with a lot of what you're saying.
It was
apart from the drive in the JCB when I was 12, I didn't do that. but the like in terms of sort of like your college bit. So when you went at 16, you said you got like kicked out and stuff, and well, I suppose excluded basically, like at various or kicked out. But it's slightly different in post 16. But you get my point. Yeah. Like, what happened there then? What was the story there?
So with the the sixth form. So obviously at that point you don't have to stay in school, and they don't care if you quit. So it's up to you to sort of study. I think the sixth form. I think what happened was we'd actually had a new sixth form added to the school, right? So it was very unorganized as we went into the second year of it being open. We had a lot of lecturers quitting and dropping out and things like that. So basically what happens, our entire year failed, right? The whole year. All of us got used.
Oh, my goodness.
Really, really, really big shit show. And I think at that point, I'd asked to come back and do my, so it's AS and then A-levels. So I was hoping to do my A-levels, but I'd failed basically on my AS. So I'd start the AS again, but they basically said, we don't want you back. So that was fun. We don't think it's for you, sort of thing. And I was studying things like psychology. I really enjoyed English back then. I got really high grades in English. So I was trying to do like English, psychology. I can't remember what else I was trying to do. Something IT related and sports. They were the sort of things I was doing. I think that's how you do A-levels. I can't remember. Anyway, so we kind of got told, I think a lot of that year got told that we wasn't really for us, but it wasn't because we were idiots. It's because they sort of really messed up the opening of that sixth form, from what I remember. And then from there, I went on to Bury College. Now, at this point, I was 15, 16. Yeah, so I'd started working in a nightclub at 15 years old. And because I wanted to make some money, so I was working at a nightclub on the weekends, and then I picked up extra shifts in the week when I wasn't at college. So I would basically finish work at the nightclub at 6 a.m, go out and get drunk, and then I'd have college the next day. So I'd go into college, obviously, still drunk from the night before, 16, 17 years old. So I must have looked like an alcoholic at like 16, 17. But it wasn't that. I just worked in a nightclub. So then I was doing a sports course, BTEC Sports. I thought it'd be great. I thought this is for me. I like sports. I very quickly learned that it was quite boring, quite technical, quite scientific. Wasn't for me again. So I cared even less. And I went out a lot more, went to a lot of house parties. And so, yeah, I kind of spent the age 16, 17, 18 sort of finding myself as an adult, I guess. Going to parties, finding friends, going out all the time, girls, that sort of stuff. Typical,
I mean, I'm just trying to kind of, because we're going to move on in the kind of second half of this. I've got Andrew Old coming on. We're going to talk about the idea of kind of exclusion and the data behind it and the stats behind it and if it's ever okay and so on. But I'm just wondering, like, from your perspective, because really, I mean, you can tell us a little bit now about since school. So I mean, I was going to ask you, obviously, first of all, about how you ended up on The Apprentice. I was interested in the process of you getting on The Apprentice, because I'm presuming that is quite difficult to get on The Apprentice in the first place.
100%.
I mean, what did you have to do to get on it?
For anyone that's interested in applying, you basically sell yourself to the devil. But before you do that, no, you apply, you fill in a really big application form. And you sort of have to justify why you think you should go on this show. So at this point, it's kind of questions of, what have you been doing? What qualifications have you got? What's your work experience like? Do you work for yourself? Have you been working for yourself, etc. And then from there, if you get through that first stage, you'll go to like a hotel in Manchester or maybe even London if you're down there. And you have multiple stages of an interview all on one day. So it kind of starts in Manchester where ours was held. It started on the ground floor. The first interview round was, I think, you get 10 seconds to sell yourself. And at that point they went, who wants to go first? So I just jumped out of line and was like, hey, I'll go first. So I kind of stood out in that round because I went first and just absolutely rambled bollocks for 10 seconds. I even said, I'm actually rambling bollocks right now. So from there, it's like you move through the floors. Each level of the hotel that we went to had a different sort of theme. Somewhere sit-down interviews, some are group activities, etc. If you get through that, then you go to London, and then you go to a big group interview. So all the best from all the ones around the UK come together. If you get through that, then you have what do you have to, like, psychology tests? Like, you get tested to make sure you're not absolutely mental before you go on the show. Then last sort of phase is you sort of have a phone call, go through business plan, etc. And then you're on the show. So it's quite extensive, and it's like a good 3 month process, if I remember rightly.
For
2
me, to 3 months.
I think for me, I was just I was walking out of the gym one day and I just saw an email. I must have signed up for a notification at some point, and it's like, The Apprentice is now casting. I was like, I've been working myself a while. I've got a couple of degrees in business. I've been freelancing for a couple of years. I've worked my way up in marketing. I was like, maybe now is the time to see if I could start a business. And that was at 28 years old. And I was 28. And then I went on the show over my 29th, and it was out in the winter after that. Crazy.
And then obviously you did quite well, didn't you? You got through to the final, was it 5?
Oh yeah, I was last man standing. So there was, I think, 16 people on my year. And obviously you go in there, you don't know how long you're going to be in there for. So you're essentially packing for an unknown amount of time. And you imagine how shit it'd be if you get there, you're the first one out. So like you go, say goodbye to everyone, give your job a break or whatever, leave your job, get there and get fired straight away. But somehow, by pure miracle and chance, I managed to blag my way all the way to the end. And literally by miracle and by chance, if you actually watched our series.
Well, I've watched a few episodes, Lewis, since inviting you onto this, and I don't think it was just by chance. I think you're undercooking yourself a little bit there. I think you've got a lot of different skills, and that's why I was interested with this kind of, because if you look at your education story on paper, it looks quite, well, you said it yourself, you presumably didn't feel like it kind of worked for you, or it was good for you, that you got something out of it. It sounds to me like you managed to find your own path, basically. And and that was that sort of thing.
Left high school, didn't know what I wanted to do, had no idea what was open to me. Went to college, no real support, no real help understanding the world around me as I'm going to adulthood. And it was only when I went, again, I reached out to a lot of entrepreneurs. And when I was working abroad, there's a gap somewhere where I went to work abroad, by the way. I was in a ski resort and I was around all these very wealthy businessmen. They all rock up in the resort with these 4x4 Maseratis or whatever the hell they were. And I was like, who are those guys? I'm going to make friends with them. And I did. I literally followed them around like I lost puppy for their entire duration. These guys must have paid 10 grand a person per week to go on holiday. And all they got was this 21-year-old lad from Manchester chasing around the slopes, asking them questions about business. And the actual thought between them all, kind of like the common thought, was I shouldn't be a holiday rep. Obviously, I'm not going to get rich doing that. And they said, come home. And if I wanted to be a business person, go and study business, find out about business, go maybe even actually study at university. So I kind of came back, did a foundation degree, then I did a degree in business. Then I found marketing, then I did a master's degree in marketing. So actually, eventually, I went quite high in terms of academic study. Do you know what I mean? I actually went much further than most people go, and I'm hoping to do a PhD when I get a bit more free time. So it wasn't academic, and it wasn't that I couldn't study. It's just that I hadn't found what was right for me.
I suppose my question is, what this is kind of going back to what I said before. If you were looking back now at your sort of school, college, kind of the kind of 11 to 21 sort of age range, what subjects or what sort of teaching or what sort of learning or what sort of experience do you think would have helped you or been more suitable for you? What would you change about it if you could go back now, sort of thing?
To be honest, we did a lot of, again, if you guys remember, we did a lot of textbook studying, right? The internet was pretty crap back then. So we like books, sitting in nice straight rows, listening to someone yap at you. I would fall asleep quite a lot of the time. Not fall asleep, but like I would completely zone out. Like I couldn't listen if you paid me. But then, when I was at university, a lot of that is group work, coursework, studies, investigations, whatever. So you're moving around, you're talking, you're learning, and so I learn by doing. I learn by getting involved. I do not learn by someone standing there talking to me. If you stand there and talk to me, if you give me a book, I'll give you an example. I'm trying to learn to fly a plane at the moment, right? I can fly the damn thing perfectly. They can't let me fly it on my own until I'm halfway through. So you're supposed to, at this point, have done some exams. I've got this book on the table right next to me. I've had that book there for 6 months. I've read it cover to cover 2-3 times. Can't remember a fucking thing that's in it. Could not tell you what the front of the cover says.
We apologise for the language. Lewis, stop swearing. Sorry. We'll have to call these out.
That's fine. I couldn't tell you what is in that book, right? But I could go in the plane, I could take off, and I could land, and we wouldn't die. So I can I can learn by doing, but physically sitting there and being talked at or reading in a book, it's just, I'm never going to learn. So, but that's me. Some of my friends are perfect at that, right? They were really good.
No, I think there's a lot, there would be, there would be an argument to say, and I'm sure we'll come on to this later on in general on the show, is that there is an argument that many students end up getting excluded or getting, maybe not quite excluded, but certainly along those lines, for not engaging with, how can I put this correctly, there would be those who would say the way in which teaching and learning is too narrow. There are those who would argue, and that leads then to many students becoming disenfranchised or disengaged or kind of, just and then going down that route in terms of kind of poor behavior or, whatever. And there would be many who would argue that. There would be others who would argue that the routes that are set down are almost like the right routes, and therefore we need to kind of like support students to do it as it is, sort of thing, and not maybe completely radically adapt what's done. There's two lines of thinking really on that in terms of how schools approach students, I guess, like you, Lewis, who are incredibly talented, gifted, but don't want to sort of go down that regular route. You think about apprenticeships and stuff like that, and and being able to diversify what students are able to do at school. That has happened a lot, but there are many who would still argue that it's too narrow. It's still too narrow.
I have to admit though, right? I know a lot of you guys probably hate this, but if you look at when schools were brought about, there's a lot of talk about this on social media not long ago. When the sort of idea of a school was created, what were people doing back then, right? What was the jobs people were involved in? They weren't creative. They were all, a lot of them are structured, manual, blue collar, that sort of stuff. And it makes sense. We sit in rows, we talk, we spoke, we put our hand up to speak, we go to the toilet when we're allowed, all that sort of stuff. It makes sense. I don't want to go to a college or a school where it's all, drama. I used to hate drama. I'm a creative person, but I used to feel like such a prat. That wasn't a swear word, see?
Yeah, that's amazing, Lewis. Thank you so much.
It's your fault. I swear. I'm working,
yeah.
so,
I bring this out of a lot of people, Lewis, so don't worry.
But do you know what I mean? Like that's a creative lesson, and it was dancing around and banging a tambourine. I don't know what the hell we did in there, but it was very, very hippie. But that I used to feel an idiot in there, but you would think I'd like it because it's doing, but it's not. It was just like it used to make me cringe. So I don't want to. I'm not saying like the schools need to completely change, but I do think that we're working our way forward when really we should look at the environment we're in now, the types of jobs people do, and go, right, if you were going to create a school right now, if you were going to put together lessons and you were going to take students for these jobs that exist right now, you probably wouldn't sit them down in a classroom and talk to them. You probably wouldn't put them in chairs and give them textbooks. Like, it's very, very different. And I feel like the universities, I mean, they get a lot more money, don't get me wrong, but the universities are changing faster and evolving, which is then a culture shock. If you're a student at school, you go to a high school and then you go into college and university, it's complete, it's very hard to adjust because it's very different in the way in which they approach things. But I just think right now, the way in which, I mean, I went to a state school, pretty rough, horrible kids. It wasn't really bad. It was just in the middle of nowhere. But that was very, very traditional. I mean, it's been a long time. I do go into them and talk to the students sometimes at colleges and that, but I've not been in high school in ages.
Yeah. I mean, it's just interesting to hear because, like I say, there'll be a lot of students who are sort of like you, who, and I mean, I was going to ask you, why did you misbehave? Did you misbehave sometimes for a laugh? Because
I think
was it just because you wanted to have a laugh?
No, I think it was more. I had all this energy and I didn't know what to do with it, so that's part of it. And the other thing is, if you tell me not to do something, I'm probably going to do it. Like, not in a bad way. I just really like to push boundaries. I really like to push buttons and see what happens.
Sort of a rebellious thing, like a teenage rebellion sort of.
Well, it's not
thing.
gone away though. I thought it would go.
No, it hasn't.
I think I'm just an anarchist now. I just like to watch things burn. No, I'm joking.
Well, tell us about. I mean, you do some really interesting stuff now. Maybe tell us, because I know you told me when I met you in person is one of the stories about your phone. That's quite a good story. That one. Tell us about that one.
What did I tell you about my phone? I forgot. I'm sorry.
You told me about the one where you was it your phone where it was
stolen? Oh, it was my AirPods.
Oh, AirPods. Sorry, the AirPods.
No. For those of you, I don't know. So if you, for example, if you take that on face value, which was the whole point, by the way, you would go. He spent the £3,000 going chasing. Basically, what happened was someone stole my AirPods. Okay, I was flying back from Thailand in Doha to layover. I put them on the chair in the pocket, and it was a layover flight, so I had to get off the plane while they cleaned it, and we get back on the plane and go to Manchester. Same plane. I got off and I was like, oh no, I've left my AirPods. I got a notification on my phone, so I go back to the door and I say, hey, can I come back on the plane? My AirPods are just in the seat. No, you can't come back on. They were like, but if it was your wallet, by the way, or your passport, you can. But because it's not going to interfere onward travel, you can't. I was like, well, this is a stupid rule. And they were like, don't worry, we'll bring them to you. Go and stand at this desk, which was a nightmare to find. And I did. Anyway, long story short, they never arrived. I stood there for 4 hours like a lemon, got back on the plane. They were gone. Obviously, the cleaning crew have come on in between. Someone's found them and pocketed them. And they were in the pockets, so like they must have gone through all the pockets to clean. Anyway, I forgot about them. And then I think 2 months later, I got a notification. My AirPods had moved, and I was looking, and I could see that they'd left Doha, and they were in where the hell was it? In the Himalayan mountains in Nepal, right? So I'm like, whoa, they've been sold. But I was like, how interesting! I can follow this person in this village in Nepal and just sort of watch them for the rest of my life because my AirPods were stuck to my phone, and I sort of just did that like a weird creep. Just watching what they were getting up to, where they went on their adventures, and then they flew back to Doha. So I made a few jokes before they came back, and I was like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if I went to Nepal to go and get them back? Should I go and get them back? Like, is Nepal dangerous? Am I going to die? Who knows? And then they actually flew back to Doha, and I realized that they were going to and from the airport regularly. I was like, it's someone that works at the airport. They must have been home for a holiday, and now they're back. So I ring my friend and I said, look, we're going to go get them back. And I literally flew out there and we tracked the person down using Find My AirPods on my phone. You can watch it on my YouTube or on my TikTok. It's there, the full sort of video, like it's 10 minutes. But it's very interesting that you can track them. So the whole point of that was, okay, I'm making adverts now quite a lot. We're doing marketing. So wouldn't it be interesting if I turn this opportunity into a piece of marketing content? Let's do a piece for Apple and say, okay, if you buy an Apple product, you get Apple AirPods, you can track them. And this is how strong it is. You can track them around the world. And so we did just that. And I turned it into like a little mini campaign showcasing how a bit of creativity in your marketing approach can really generate buzz. And we hit every headline in every newspaper in every country around the world. It went viral. It's had 1 million views on my TikTok, like 1 million views, like 5-6 million views on everyone else's. YouTube 100,000. So it just went viral. It hit every newspaper. And it generated me business. It brought me clients, which is what the whole point of the whole thing was. Like, okay, I spend $3,000, but I might make 10 grand.
I mean, it's just interesting because that whole it's you kind of on face value, you're like, oh, that's hilarious, that's a silly stunt, but then obviously there's a serious side to it too, which is generating business for your marketing agency or whatever.
It's the clever part of marketing, isn't it, right? I'm trying to appeal to the eccentric, clever businessman who likes to get weird and wonderful with his marketing or his business. It gets their attention. For the person that's everyday average Joe and Sally, they'll just be like, oh, what a moron. Who the hell spends that much money? And it's like, but it's not for you, mate. You won't get it. So don't worry yourself. But that was it. Like, it did generate as business. It acts as a bit of like a good thing for our portfolio. And that was my idea. I was going to do something I call it badvertising. Creating content for advertising purposes in a unique and creative way. Advertising and on a budget.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, I've heard about you smashing up your cars as well and buying a car to smash up and creating almost scenes that people will, and I can't remember your phrase that you used when it came to marketing, but like outside the box marketing sort of thing, kind of shock and awe marketing,
Well, that was a networking event, and that car I got was actually due to be scrapped a few days later, but I gave it one last lease of life and used it in a rage room. I built a rage room. I didn't tell anyone what was there. I do these events. I keep them secret. You buy a ticket, and then on the day, you get a text with a password and a location. And when you go there, there's always something unique happening. By the way, if anyone's interested, the next one's on Friday in Manchester. I can't tell you what it is, but you can find out more about it on LinkedIn. It's going to be awesome.
It's just, I mean, it's all really, really interesting. And I think, again, you're a very creative person. I suppose my question is that it's not a question to you, actually. It's just a general question, is like, creative people like you who go on to be extremely successful people after school could maybe be successful in school. And that would be my question, is there a have we evolved? Is there now a space for people who are more creative to excel? I think there is in many schools, perhaps others not. I don't know. And this is more me thinking out loud in terms of your journey towards being an apprentice finalist, setting up award-winning marketing agencies, but yet left school. You said that your form, I can't remember what you said, but you couldn't attend form for 2 years or something or whatever.
So like I'm
guessing your behavior was I'm guessing your behavior was probably, I mean, you probably know yourself, oh, I was naughty or whatever, or I didn't do what they wanted me to do. But I suppose you're saying there were reasons behind that.
So I did the work, I got the grades, but I didn't have to pay attention to do that. I used to find it quite easy. I used to hate maths, by the way, and so is it Andrew? I do apologise. I really was bad at maths. But that again that's very statistical, analytical, and written down in a book, and I struggled with that. But apart from that, everything else, I was really.
He won't mind. He won't mind.
I was quite alright at it. But the point is, right, I wasn't the person that fit in at school, right? So I didn't get on in class. I was kicked out of class all the time. I wasn't naughty. I got the grades. I was just mischievous and cheeky and noisy. And it's because I couldn't concentrate because I wasn't engaged. Basically, I wasn't engaged, right? We know that. You can figure it out. You can see that now.
Yeah.
However, I then typically shouldn't have been able to carry on and be academic and get all the other degrees that everyone else gets, right? But I did. Yeah, all the ones that sat in their rows, a lot of them didn't go to university. They didn't really go past university and do any postgrad or anything like that. So why do I fit in further down the line, but I don't fit in at school? Now, that's my point before, where is it because schools haven't evolved to that point yet? And is it because they're still quite a lot of them are quite traditional in their approach? Is it because it's more restricted for you guys to make changes because it's very top down? I mean, let's look at it this way, right? I understand that a lot of the universities have free reign because they're their own businesses, their own establishments. But a lot of the public schools are funded by the government, a government which is very, very out of touch with the for example, me, the kid that skinned from Haslingden that no one gave a toss, no one cared about. Sorry, I tried not to swear.
nearly did it.
But the point is, like, is it because you guys don't have any power to make any real changes in those situations? Is it because I don't know. That's just as I get older. That's my viewpoint of school. Like,
Oh, it's really interesting.
because
It's really,
because
because there's a
teachers.
lot of
I was going to say, you guys are you're underpaid. You generally don't have more or less all the equipment and things that you need, the assets, the budget. You just don't get it, and you got to try and make do. And every year that's cut and cut. If you're in a public school, that is. Private schools, they're living a life. I heard one of them play. They play something called bandy the other day because I learned about that hockey game they play in posh schools. We never had that. We had all-weather football, and we all just got absolutely wet through. But the point is that why? Is it because there's more money further down the line, or is it because the government doesn't have an understanding of what kids need and what the education is because they're all rich kids from Eton? Like,
well, I don't know. I don't know what there is certainly what you've said. There is much sort of. There are many people who would support what you're saying in terms of the way in which schools are set up for learners. Not all schools, but there is certainly that almost, there are those who will say, look, schools are still set up, everyone sat in rows, everyone facing the front, teacher talks, do a task, teacher talks, and it's still set up that way. But there are many people who would say that that's the way that works the best, that actually children being instructed in that way is where they will learn best, or where they will learn the quickest, and where they will, so there are there's arguments on both sides of this. But the reason I asked you on is I find it really interesting to listen to someone who is probably, there are many students like you who go through school who feel disenfranchised, disengaged, like it's just not for them. And maybe even some of them are told it's not for them. Rarely, but it can happen. And it's interesting just to hear that perspective, especially when we're talking about something like students being excluded, or even if it's suspended, whatever. Students not being able to access education. There are different sides to every sort of coin, if you like, and it's that's why I was interested to hear your sort of take on that. I mean, one thing I will say, you said like you would like group work. I mean, for me as a teacher, thinking about my classrooms, it is, in my opinion, it's much harder for a teacher to control group work, if that makes sense, Lewis. So if if I had you in a group, I'd be like, my God, he's just gonna like talk through the whole session. Do you know what I mean, with the other people in the group? So I suppose my question to you would be, if is that a bad thing though? Like, I don't know. Like, maybe that's just.
I have this theory. I mean, obviously, by the way, I've not made it yet. I'm by no means a millionaire or anything, right? I've done a lot of things, but I've not quite got where I want to be yet. However, I've got this theory that if this isn't just in schools, by the way, and also when I talk about schools, I'm talking about what I saw 15 years ago. I'm not talking about what it is now. I have no idea what it's like now. But I will say, like, when someone, I'm trying to think of a good example, like, say, let's talk about Richard Branson or Elon Musk, right? I know it's quite big examples, but these guys will go around saying, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm this type of person, right? And 9 times out of 10, they get called idiots, right? You're an idiot. You can't, it's mental. What you're talking about, it's not right. It's not the right way of doing things. That's not how we do things. We do things this way, right? And that's fine. That's what happens. I get it a lot. And then one day when they make it and they just forge a completely new path, everyone goes, oh, they're not idiots. They're eccentric. They're creative. And you sort of get praised for that creativity, but you get told that you're wrong all this way through. And I've pretty much gone through the same path. I got told that the way I act is wrong, the way I talk is wrong. Not just in schools, by the way, just like in careers, in business, in the boardroom. I've been fired from jobs because I refused to stop sending koala bear facts every morning at 9 a.m. because I was making what I thought was a statement. But it turns out there's a lot of koala bear facts out there. But the point is, like, if you're going to be different, you're going to think different, act different, and be different. You have to be willing to deal with that. But it's the kids that don't know that they're destined to do those things and be those people, right? And they don't know anything about who they're going to be. They're just figuring themselves out. If you tell them they're a bad kid, you tell them they're bad, you're not right, this isn't how you do things. I'm not surprised they're coming through with like anxiety and stress and depression, all these fancy words that everyone uses now. Like, I'm not surprised because they're trying to figure themselves out. They're trying to learn their path, and they're getting told that what they're doing is wrong before they're even ready to face the world. So, the one place where you shouldn't be told that you're bad and naughty and wrong is when you're in school, because that's the only place you're supposed to be bloody protected. because once you leave school, you are on your own. And I felt that whilst I was in school, I didn't have any of that. I just didn't feel like I belonged anywhere. And imagine that, right? I didn't feel like I fit in at school. Didn't feel like I fit in my family. Didn't feel like I fit in when I was at work, in Tesco. I just didn't have a place. And eventually what happened was when I got to 18 years old, I ran away, right? Basically, I just left the country and I went away for 4 years. So it got to the point where I actually just felt so much like a misfit. I just left. And that, just been kicked out of college or whatever.
Yeah.
And I had no one that thought like me, felt like me. I'd never seen anyone that acted like me or until I found business owners. And I'm not even surprised for a second that the moment I found business owners, I latched onto them and I refused to stop speaking to them because I was like, oh my God, for the first time in my life, there is someone over there that tells me that they were like me and they were managed to achieve something and they did something. So I'm not saying, by the way, to anyone said that what I'm doing is right. I have no idea if what I'm doing is going to work. I have no idea if I'm doing the right things to get to where I want to be. All I'm doing is giving it every single opportunity, every single shot I could possibly think, anything I could think of to make it to that next place, which I have in my mind's eye, and no one else can see around me, apart from a select few people that I trust with everything. So. Yeah. I know I'm rambling on. I know it's. I'm
no,
not
it's really. I'm really enjoying it. I find it just so interesting to.
It literally. I rarely reflect on school, but the path for me fully started in school. It fully started when I was young, and that was the point. And it's quite sad to reflect upon, right? Because it's hard enough going through the ranks and trying to learn how to be an adult and fit in as it is, without all that extra stuff. So I'm not surprised that most kids these days just do they all just do the same thing as each other, right? And they don't. They're afraid to step outside the norm. And when they do, they think they're weird, and that's when things like anxiety and depression things come because they just don't fit. So I'm not surprised that everyone just sort of wants to be a part of the crowd. I call it the black sheep theory. The moment you start to step outside of the societal norms, you sort of are perceived to be a black sheep. And the adage, was it the old adage, says the nail that sticks out gets hammered. You have to be prepared to take the hammer, but a lot of kids can't do that because they haven't developed that capacity yet. I don't know if I'm just chatting absolute nonsense or...
No, it's not, because it hits at the heart of the stuff we're going to talk about now. I know, Lewis, and you're welcome to kind of stay on now, Lewis, for as long as you want. We're going to go through till about 9-ish. And I've got Andrew on, and we're going to talk about this issue of exclusion in more detail from a kind of teaching and learning perspective. But honestly, mate, that was amazing just to hear your insights into your education, your story since. So feel free to stick around.
Yeah,
and if you want to kind of interject at any point, and you might have a question, you might say, well, what, ask whatever you want, and maybe say whatever you want, say your opinions as we go through. So Andrew, are you there? Unmute yourself, bottom left, mate. Hopefully. Should be a little blue icon. Andrew. Maybe Andrew can't connect with us. But while Andrew does that, that was Lewis Ellis, by the way. Everyone in the space, if you want to see what Lewis does, just...
Am I here now?
Hello, good evening.
Oh, dear me.
Good evening.
Hello.
You okay?
Yeah, no, I had it on laptop and I couldn't find the microphone setting, so I switched to phone, but the laptop's still on and the laptop seems to be a few seconds behind the phone, so it was doing my head in.
But you've got to join this thing on a phone, unfortunately, which
fair enough.
Can be annoying.
I will go and close the laptop before you hear me in double. Got it.
Brilliant.
No,
brilliant.
It's still making noise even when it's closed. Good grief.
I'll just die soon. Just throw it out the window.
I'll just throw it out the window. Yeah.
Exactly. That's what Lewis would do, and he'd film himself doing it, and like 1 million people would see it on TikTok. It'd be great.
But it's my work laptop, so possibly not the best.
Don't do that then.
Best option.
Yeah, don't do that. But Andrew, you're, in case anyone doesn't know, you're a math teacher, blogger, and a general kind of education thinker. And one of your big things that you thought a lot about of late has been exclusions. So I want to get into this now with you, because there is a big movement within UK education, particularly in the last few years, around no more exclusions, around ending exclusions, and also a narrative around exclusions increasing in how many exclusions are happening. There is, for example, the NEU have reported that exclusions have been going up. Now, I know that you've disputed that in your blog, so we'll come on to that soon. But also there is this general movement that exclusion can be discriminatory. And also, I guess, there is a kickback against that from teachers and other people who feel disempowered, perhaps teachers who are being assaulted or abused and stuff like that, who are saying students should be excluded, but they're not being excluded. So I wondered, maybe just to start with, Andrew, whether you could maybe bring out your sort of key thinking on this issue of exclusion that's driven you to write 4 or 5 blogs on it fairly recently.
Well, my starting point is I was a teacher in the noughties when there was a lot of pressure not to exclude. And I worked in a school in a local authority where they'd come in and said, don't ever exclude, keep them in at all costs. And that was when I was an NQT. I remember what it was like to live in a school where there was to work in a school where there was no bottom line. And all that seemed to happen was behaviour got more and more extreme. And because the things that you'd expect would have children removed completely from a school just became suspensions, the things that would have been suspensions became just detentions, and the things that would have been detentions became, well, maybe just a telling off. And it got to the point where it was a struggle to teach, where you'd be reporting serious incidents every day. You'd be sworn at, kids would be spitting over balconies. And at the same time, there was this narrative of this is a very successful, inclusive school because, look, it doesn't exclude anybody. So I'm coming from that attempts to force schools not to exclude do harm. That at some level, you need some level of discipline, you need some level of safety. Sorry, can you hear me okay?
Yeah. Just listening. Carry on, unless you finish that.
No, sorry, the screen changed, but no, I can still hear you. Excellent. So that's kind of my starting point. And more recently, some of the pressure not to exclude got really removed. And I think from like 2007, some of the talk of inclusion ended. And then in about 2012, there was less powers to appeal against exclusions, and it became a bit more normal. And then they started to rise a bit. And when I say rise a bit, I mean, this is still tiny. Exclusions, permanent exclusions are extremely rare. I mean, they rose to about 1 in 1,000 pupils. So it's not something you'd see very often. You might, if you're big secondary school, you might see a couple in a year, or if you were in a particularly challenging environment. It wasn't common. But just rising to that point, slowly over a few years, caused this huge kickback, not from teachers, not from people in schools, not from kids, but from activists, people who work for charities, educationalists, pretty much everyone that did not have to deal with a classroom environment where, say, violence or abuse or racist bullying or guns, sorry, that's probably pushing it, but knives, drugs, people didn't have to deal with those issues and teach 30 kids at a time were weighing in to say exclusions are disgraceful. And the narrative has not changed, even though, inevitably from all the lockdowns, exclusions have dropped. I mean, the last figures are 2021, and it's the lowest rate of permanent exclusions on record. I don't think it's ever been as low. And you can still pick up a newspaper that will say exclusions are rising. There hasn't been a big rise in exclusions for 5 years or so, but it's still the narrative we hear. We're still hearing it's an almost endless.
Oh, is that me who's dropped, or is that Andrew?
No, it's Andrew.
Andrew, you've dropped me. Don't know if your signal's dodge. We just missed that last little bit, but I'll just pick on what Andrew's saying while he's reconnecting. But essentially, Andrew's blogs and the ones that he's written fairly recently talk about how permanent exclusions have in fact gone down. So there's a graph on one of them where it shows that since, I think, 2006, it's kind of steadily been dropping and dropping. I think Andrew's challenge to that, and I don't want to speak for him, was that, in fact, the narrative is that they're increasing, but the facts are they're decreasing. I don't want to speak for him. Andrew, I think you're back.
What was the last, where did you hear me get to? What was the last thing I was doing?
We kind of only missed the last sort of 10 seconds of what you've just said. So we got almost all of it apart from
exclusions were at the lowest they've ever been, and people are still complaining they're high. We get complaints that they're discriminatory, and you look at the current statistics, and most of those complaints are just so out of date. I mean, it is now the case that ethnic minority students are far less likely to be excluded than white British students, and even where some of the groups where there was a historical gap, the gap has closed. So, I mean, the claim of discrimination, it's constantly made. I'm constantly being told black people... I
think you've dropped again. Andrew, are you near your, router? I hope it's not me.
Is that any better?
Maybe it's me.
Is that better?
I don't know.
Can you hear me?
But yeah, I think you've dropped again. But I'll try and... I don't know if it might be my Wi-Fi.
I could actually hear him then.
Could you? It could be me, you know. It could be me.
It's probably me because my phone wasn't ready and prepared. And it's an old...
No, don't worry. It's probably me. I don't know.
Can you hear me now?
But anyway, carry on. Say that. So basically, I think I heard that last bit, basically, that the crux of it was you were saying that exclusions are not rising. They haven't risen. They're not going up. I suppose my key question, though, is... I suppose the question of this show, Andrew, is exclusion, is it ever okay? So I suppose my question is, and I'm going to ask you both, actually. I'll ask you first, Andrew, and then I might come on to Lewis as well. Is excluding a student ever okay to do?
My answer is obviously... Oh, sorry. Sorry, you said Lewis. Sorry, go ahead.
No, Andrew, I wanted you first. I wanted you to answer first, and then Lewis.
Okay. Yes, my answer is most definitely yes, and I can prove it in one news story. There was a story in 2007. There was a court case where a school was sued, and they were sued over their failure to exclude. And there had been this pupil who had sexually assaulted a member of the cleaning staff. And there'd been another incident as well outside of school. And at that time, exclusion was really frowned upon, and they did not exclude. And subsequently, there was a violent rape of a teacher in the school. And that teacher sued the school for not excluding. And the school obviously didn't have a leg to stand on and had to pay substantial compensation. And every time someone says, oh, you should never exclude, that will be the case I'd go to. Apart from the fact the court said quite clearly the school should have excluded, I also just think morally, how can anyone look at a case like that and say, oh no, they were right not to exclude? So there must be somewhere you draw the line. That's the most extreme case. And it's just a question of where you draw the line. And I would say at 1 in 1,000 pupils being excluded, even in a year with high exclusions, we're probably not erring on the side of excluding too many. And
I mean, I know this is probably a silly question, Andrew, but do you think exclusions are actually too low? Do you actually think we need more exclusions?
I think it's arguable. I think there are schools that should exclude more. I think there are schools that aren't safe. I mean, ask a supply teacher, and they can usually tell you about the local schools where they were not safe.
Yeah, because there'd be many, though, who would say that look, it's up to the school to sort of, you only have to look on Twitter or even just Google, and you can see huge kind of swathes and examples of teachers and individuals who would say it's up to the school to find a way to not exclude. It's up to the school to be inclusive. Do you sort of understand that argument in terms of they're the professionals and they need to find a way to facilitate education regardless?
Teacher Tapp asked teachers if thought schools permanently excluded too many pupils, and the overwhelming majority disagreed. I mean, it's not very often teachers that say, no, I think we can put up with a bit more violence in the classroom, maybe a few more knives. It's usually people that do not work in the kind of schools that need to exclude. So I don't think there are professionals to defer to that have a better perspective on this than teachers. And teachers overwhelmingly support the school's right to exclude. Yeah. Not least because we're the ones that have to live with the consequences when schools fail to exclude.
Yeah, I mean, one of the key groups that's campaigning for zero exclusions is No More Exclusions, right? Who are a group of, I guess you call them a pressure group, who want a situation where exclusion is banned, is basically banned. And as far as I can tell from their website, they are also saying that exclusion in itself is inherently sort of, racist. Basically, there are elements to it that are around kind of white supremacy. There are elements to it that are that they even don't want. I think from what I read, they want to defund alternative provision, so they don't necessarily even want somewhere where the student can be excluded to exist. Now, many people back this group, Andrew. Many people, and many groups and individuals back them. Can you not understand the impact an exclusion would have on a young person in terms of, okay, if we exclude them, that's sort of it. That, they're out. It's a permanent exclusion. There's no way back. There's no sort of second chance. They're done.
I can understand the impact, but I don't think they benefit from getting away with it. And I also think that we should look to the victim. It's not good enough to say that if a perpetrator of a serious crime is a child, then just keep them where they are. It's fine. I'm sure we can talk it out. And No More Exclusions have been challenged again and again over the issue of sexual assault and what would they do with children who commit sexual assault. And so far, they've done 2 long documents that have tried to answer that sort of question. And one of them has said a restorative conversation would be better for the victim of sexual assault than the perpetrator being moved to a different school. And another document just said, well, sexual assault is normal in school anyway. So, what's exclusion got to do with it? We need to reform society, presumably some kind of revolution. It's difficult to work out what they mean in practice because they only oppose. They don't propose sensible solutions. They call themselves abolitionists, which I think is part of a movement that wants to abolish all prisons. I don't think their ideology is in any way possible to implement. I don't think it's in any way sensible. And I know that if you challenge them about these things on Twitter, they'll block you in a second. The number of teachers they've blocked just for asking, but what about cases of sexual assault? Would you really keep the perpetrator in with the victim? And it's not that I want kids excluded and then thrown away, abandoned. They should be excluded and given more help, given the chance to change. But protecting the victim comes first. And it sets, by excluding, you're setting that line that others see they should not cross. And you're also making the student that has been excluded an obvious priority for that help and intervention. When schools are forced not to exclude, they don't put more help and intervention in place. They just start covering up the things that they should be excluding for.
Do you think that, though, in certain instances, children are excluded for fidgeting or not engaging with things, or, as people, I guess, some would term this disruption or low-level disruption, or, you know, sort of things that they shouldn't be getting excluded for? Do you not think that kind of goes on?
If we're talking permanent exclusions, I find it impossible to believe, partly because the number of exclusions is so low. When you look at things like the number of crimes reported to police that take place in schools, or the number of teachers that say they've been assaulted or verbally abused, when you look at the number of serious incidents in schools, the number of actual permanent exclusions is tiny. So it's never made sense to me to think that it's little things that kids would need to be getting excluded for when there's so many serious things that it might be appropriate for. I think the myth that it's about low-level disruption is because there is a category in the exclusion figures called persistent disruptive behaviour. And people have decided to focus on the word disruptive rather than the word persistent. I mean, that is the category for the repeat offenders, and a lot of kids do get exclusions in that category, but it doesn't mean it's low-level disruption or trivial stuff. And we know better about that now anyway, because they've just changed the way the statistics are done. So it used to be the case you could only put one thing down for an exclusion. And when that was the case, then obviously the repeat offenders could only be put down for persistent disruptive behaviour. But now they can put up to 3 reasons down for an exclusion. And the result of that is you can see, well, there's only 4,000 exclusions, but the number of really serious incidents in the statistics is overwhelming. I mean, 4,000 exclusions, but almost 900 are for physical assault against a pupil. There may be overlaps, obviously, it can be more than one thing, but there's 568 are physical assault against an adult, and most of the exclusions from primary schools are in that category. Also over 500 verbal abuse or threatening behaviour against an adult, over 500 use or threat of an offensive weapon, 400 that are drug and alcohol related, over 250 that are verbal abuse or threatening behaviour against a pupil, 109 for damage. These are not small numbers of really serious incidents. These are, I guess they're small numbers compared with the number of kids, but compared with the number of exclusions, this is big. I don't think it is minor things. If you told schools not to exclude, those are going to be affected. You cannot bring down exclusion figures without tolerating things like assault, abuse, weapons, drugs. It's just not going to happen. That's why exclusions are needed. That's the question that always needs to be answered. What would you do in those cases?
Well, I don't know whether, Lewis, I don't know whether you've got any comments on anything you've heard us discussing in the last sort of 15 minutes or so.
Yeah,
just before I ask, because I know, go on.
Just listen to you guys speak. Obviously, if something's a crime, then it needs to be dealt with appropriately, right? That the majority of people I saw get excluded. Physical assault's interesting because the amount of times that I had some little shitbag try and start a fight with me, and I would end it, and I would get in trouble, detention, or kicked out of school for it when I never started it. So I don't know if is there a fairer way to judge who should be excluded? Is there a way that you guys can almost like a court, right? You're guilty until proven innocent until proven guilty. I don't know, but when it's a crime or something serious, then fair enough. I fully agree. They should be kicked out of school. But then the problem goes, what do you think that person's going to become like when they're older, right? So if they're that bad at a young age, it's probably because it's for their home life or their surroundings. You're then putting them in a surrounding where they're not with their own age and they're with more of those people that were the negative impacts on them. I can't see him getting better. So I'm just thinking, I'm thinking, what is a better way of dealing with it? Kick them out, sure. Get rid of them. Get them out of your eyesight, and out of your classrooms because they're disrupting everyone else. But then I don't see them becoming fit members of society further down the line. In fact, I can see much worse things happening further down the line.
That's a really interesting point. Andrew, anything on what Lewis has said there? Because that's a really strong point, isn't it? What happens afterwards?
I mean, absolutely. But then part of the point of exclusion is that they then become the responsibility of the local authority, who should have specialist services in place, things that an ordinary school could not provide. I mean,
let's be honest, but literally no local authority that I can think of has anything like that. The police are the ones that deal with most mental health issues these days, and even those guys are underpaid, understaffed, and don't have the capacity to do that. So I was just thinking, what happens to the young people?
It's an absolute legal obligation. They must provide the child with an education within 6 days, on the 6th day after the permanent exclusion. I mean, it's something that the local authority could be taken to court if they're not providing an education. And sometimes they will just put the child in a different school for a fresh start. Sometimes it will be a pupil referral unit, sometimes alternative provision. But the local authority has more options than a school's head teacher does, and more resources available. I mean, it isn't about just writing students off. I mean, I think there's an argument when you look at the point of view of the victims, the people who are in danger from keeping a child in a school, that you have to get rid of them regardless. But it's not get rid of them and then abandon them. If anything, I think part of the problem with turning people on that path, and they're being violent in school, they're already on that path towards criminal, they're already on the worst path. It's not something that's going to start after they were excluded. They're already on the worst path. But I think the effort to just keep them in school with a perpetual supply of victims is more likely to make it worse.
Andrew, I'm just going to interrupt you there because I'm going to come on to Christina now, who has been waiting very patiently for a while. Christina, can you hear us okay?
I can. Can you hear
just
me?
Just before you say your point, I'm just going to give a shout out to a couple of things from Teachers Talk Radio's perspective. At the very top of this space, you can see two things. One, we're recruiting for hosts. If you're a teacher and you want to do what I'm doing but better, then please DM us and get involved in that. And the second thing is obviously the sponsor of this show, which is Witherslack Group. You can actually sign up for their virtual neurodiversity conference. You're invited to it. You can click the link at the top of the space to sign up to that. Christina, over to you.
Thank you. In my experience, I've never known a child to be excluded for persistent low-level disruption. That just doesn't happen. It's a myth. In my experience, schools will do absolutely anything that they possibly can to keep a child in school. Exclusion is the absolutely last result, and even then we are responsible for those children, and we have to make sure that they're getting an education. It's not the case of throw them out of the school and we'll never ever remember them again. It's we are still responsible for those children. So as much as I have sympathy with people who are saying we should make allowances, people have issues, and yes, absolutely they do. But a school is a place of education. You come to school, you get educated. That's what we do. And you have rules and you keep to the rules, and that's what keeps the community safe. And anybody who cannot exist within those rules or that boundary possibly needs alternative provision, and it's the lack of alternative provision that is the problem, not the way schools deal with problematic students. I was
going to ask you, Christina, I'll ask you because I asked Andrew earlier. I said to him, is there a case to say there's not enough exclusions happening? And his answer was yes, in certain schools. Do you agree with him?
Absolutely, in certain schools, yes, because you have to be aware. If you exclude too many pupils, you are accountable for that. You have to be very, very careful. And there are probably, not in my school or my experience, but there are probably schools where students should have been excluded much sooner.
Thank you. Andrew, I just want to come back to you briefly on that. I don't know whether you've got any comment on what Christina said, but also I wanted to pick on something you said earlier, which was about the people who are campaigning. I think you said something along the lines of the people who are campaigning for zero exclusions or bans on exclusions often aren't teachers or in the classroom. Can you expand a little bit more on that?
It tends to be a very one-sided debate. So I tend to read things in articles in newspapers or see podcasts where there's been a panel discussion, and every single person there thinks exclusions are the problem and the aim is to prevent them at all costs. And the reason you tend not to have many people arguing for more exclusions is because the people who are closest to it, that make those decisions the most, tend to be head teachers. And head teachers do not necessarily, well, firstly, they cannot discuss in public the actual exclusions just because of confidentiality and child protection. And the other part of it, they don't necessarily want to associate themselves with being a high exclusion school. So it tends to be the case that although when Teacher Tapp polls secondary head teachers, they're the group most in favour of permanent exclusion, there aren't many people speaking out in favour of a school's right to exclude. I'm always seeing these one-sided debates, and instead you tend to have sometimes people who are very ideological campaigners, sometimes people who believe that all children are basically innocent, and if they do something bad, you have to find out the reason and then treat the reason. And if we all did that, no child would ever do anything bad ever. You get politicians who have all sorts of odd takes on it, often thinking they can solve other social problems with it. So thinking they can solve crime by keeping all dangerous young criminals in school. Presumably they're unaware that it's possible to commit crimes in a school. I mean, it's the one case where I just wish people would say to politicians, are you really saying the best place for somebody with a child with a knife is in a room, is in a building full of children? Any other circumstance, we'd be saying, if they're dangerous, we want them somewhere where they can, others are kept safe and they are kept safe. So I think there's a lot of utopianism. People just believe the problem of the most extreme behaviour can just go away if we stop doing anything about it, or if we just care a bit more.
Do you think there's pressure, significant pressure now on schools to not exclude? And I mean, I would say there is, but I wondered what you think.
I mean, I'm genuinely hoping that since exclusion rates collapsed during the pandemic, some of that pressure to reduce them further might have gone. But there are clearly local authorities that are vocally calling for schools not to exclude, even after they've already reduced to this low level. Before the pandemic, I did a quick Twitter poll, just asked school leaders if they've been under pressure not to permanently exclude. And I got about 200 school leaders clicking the yes, they're under pressure not to exclude. So I think that pressure is real and it exists. I think it perhaps...
Well, I think in one school I worked in, I won't obviously name the school, but in one of the schools I worked in, the head teacher did tell me that they were under significant pressure to not exclude regardless, and the intimation was that they needed to and they couldn't. That was the conversation that took place. And
sorry, if you could say, how long ago was that?
I wouldn't like to say, Andrew, but it was in fairly, in the last number of years,
relatively recent.
In the last number of years, yes. This was not something that happened a decade ago. This was a relatively recent thing, and sort of the intonation was that it couldn't happen for that reason. Anyway, Andrew, I'm going to bring some other people in because we've got loads of people patiently waiting. So I'm going to go through each one in turn and invite you to kind of make your point, and if you have a question for Andrew, if you have a question for Lewis, then fire it in there. Sarah, have you got a question for Andrew?
Sarah Johnson, or is there another 1,000 Sarahs in this group?
It's just you.
Hi. It was more a comment, really, and I think it was in response to what Lewis said, and it's pleased to meet you as well, about the idea that there wasn't enough provision or support for children once they've been excluded. Now, I remember over 25 years ago now, when my older brother was excluded from school, and you're absolutely right, Lewis. At that point in time, there was no alternative provision or pupil referral units for children like my brother. And he went to what was Borstal, known at the time thereafter. I think since then we've moved on dramatically in terms of what Andrew pointed out was the local authority's responsibility to provide what's called 6-day provision, so that children have to be provided with education. Now, obviously there's difficulties with that and challenges in lots of different ways. So, for example, the CSJ, the Centre for Social Justice, a few years ago, wrote a piece around the cold spots of AP, where in some areas there were no good to outstanding alternative provision for children excluded from school. But the good news is those are few places. Most places in the UK do have provision for children that is registered. There are pupil referral units that support children who are excluded from school. But the next step is to make sure that they are resourced appropriately with the specialised staff that's needed. And Lewis sort of said, for the most part, it's the police that help them. And I do think the police and social care and child and adolescent mental health services and so on have a part to play in supporting those children. But the good news is alternative provision does exist across England to support those children. I just think we need to resource them appropriately.
Andrew, any thoughts on that? I mean, Sarah, I wanted to ask you before you go, exclusion, is it ever okay?
So I mean, I would say yes. I think we should make, and I kind of acknowledge what was said earlier by, we should make sure that we support children in the best way that we can, to make sure they're included in school life, to support them, to make sure that our rules don't disadvantage children in lots of different ways. But I do think, in the way that Jean-Luc Picard says, the line has to be drawn somewhere. And sometimes children's behaviour is unsafe. Now, again, the good news is that some of those issues are smaller than persistent disruptive behaviour, but there also needs to be a line drawn. How do we support those children with behaviour that is persistently disruptive to be included in school life? And for some, it might be that an alternative curriculum provision is needed. Some of those children might have underlying needs in terms of special needs, and they should be catered for and so on. But I think we've spoken before about this, Tom. I am not anti-exclusion, but I do want to make sure that schools are the best prepared and best supported, that when they do exclude, is because they feel ultimately the line is drawn and they don't have any other choice. And I acknowledge what another talker was saying, that generally speaking, head teachers take it incredibly seriously when they have to exclude a child. Unfortunately, I also know that there's some who may not be a fair or proportionate exclusion as well. That does exist as well, unfortunately. So we do need to make sure that things like the governance of those exclusions are robust and head teachers are held accountable. So yeah, I mean, exclusions, yes, they are okay. I would really like it that I didn't have a job and I didn't have to be the president of PRUSAP in terms of the work that I do, because I would want all children to kind of flourish in mainstream. But I know for some children, for lots of different reasons, it's really difficult.
Yeah. Andrew, do you want to say anything on that?
I mean, the general point of the crossover between SEND and special needs and exclusion, it's something that often gets a bit blurred. And back in the noughties, when there was all that pressure not to exclude, it was common to put almost every badly behaved pupil on the SEN register. And it's not necessarily wrong to do that, because being badly behaved is in its own way an educational need. But we have to be very careful not to treat bad behaviour as a disability, because entirely possible for
Yes.
children to behave badly without anything resembling a disability. Even if you think they have a persistent behaviour problem, well, it's perhaps misleading to label that as a disability. There has been a shift on this because, as I say, there used to be a category of SEN that was for all behaviour problems, and that's been phased out. And so it used to be the case that most excluded children would be counted as SEND. Now the majority aren't. But it is the case that excluded children are more likely to be labelled SEND. And you hear that a lot as an argument against exclusions. But if you look at the figures, it's a bit misleading because the overwhelming majority of excluded pupils that are labelled SEND are all in one category, social, emotional and mental health. And that is going to include things that are disabilities, things like ADHD and various mental health problems. It's also going to include pretty much any behaviour problem that someone wants to class as a special need. I think when it comes to autism, that has become the ultimate red herring in this debate, because if you actually look at the figures, autistic pupils that are on the SEND register for autism, for ASD, they're marginally more likely to be excluded than the average pupil. But once you take gender into account and the fact that boys are more likely to be excluded than girls, and pupils identified with ASD are more likely to be boys, they're actually at lower risk of exclusion. So I'm always, keen to point out that we're not excluding loads of kids with ASD. We are excluding kids that are on the SEND well, we're mainly excluding kids that aren't on the SEND register, and those that are on the SEND register, it's that SEMH category, which perhaps should be broken down to address, the different issues involved. But when you have that as your category and you're pretty much putting kids in there because of the behaviour, you can't then turn it back and say the behaviour is because of the special need, when the special need is something that they've been labelled with because of the behaviour. Now, it would be a great idea if, even regardless of that, you could cure bad behaviour through therapeutic methods. And I'm not saying there isn't a place for that. There are therapies that improve behaviour. There are behaviour interventions based on mental health that do some good. But I know when people have done meta-analysis of behaviour interventions, there's lots of therapeutic interventions that don't do any good and some that actually make behaviour worse. There's no obvious gain from treating all bad behaviour as mental illness or disability. And often I think people are very keen to throw the label in to complicate matters, to obstruct exclusion, or even as an excuse.
That's a really, I mean, Sarah, I don't know what you think about that. I think Andrew's made a really powerful and interesting point there, but I wondered what you thought.
So my argument would be, I think, kind of generically, is that the definitions of social, emotional, mental health, communication, interaction, physical and sensory, and so on, are very blurred and not necessarily particularly obvious. So, for example, we know that adults, for example, and children in the youth offending system often have specific difficulties pertaining to speech and language needs, but often they might be defined as having social, emotional, mental health needs because that's how it's expressed. So I think for me the key would be is how do we find out what is going on for this child underneath all of it in terms of that early intervention. And I think
maybe all I'm saying is maybe sometimes you can't find that out.
It's really, really difficult because I think humans want to kind of categorize and label, and I think human behavior is so much more complex than that anyway. So that actually trying to define it as it being social and emotional mental health versus social and communication, for example, the lines are incredibly blurred and it's very, very difficult. And it's often how children might express what their difficulties and challenges are.
But I suppose what I'm getting at there is, I don't know if you heard the bit with Lewis earlier. I'm not sure you did, but Lewis was on earlier, and he was talking about how he was basically excluded from his college because he was kind of like disengaged from the learning, right? He didn't have, he also said that he had ADHD, but he was disengaged. His key reason, if you like, for kind of his the behavior that he showed was like disengagement from education, which isn't like, it wouldn't be on the send register. You know what I mean? Like, that's...
Well, I mean, obviously, again, it depends. And if it's an exclusion from college, that's a different kind of remit.
Well, yeah.
Anyway,
but I'm saying there's children like him out there in secondary school, you know.
Yeah, but also I don't disagree with Andrew, and I hope I'm not putting words in his mouth as well, is that not all children's behaviour outwardly is because they've had traumatic experiences or anything like that. I think, it's okay to acknowledge that sometimes children want to be silly. They are often more engaged in risk-taking behaviour, all different things because of their kind of stage of development and so on. And I think as adults, we kind of make sure that we maintain boundaries, we're consistent, but we also need to be aware that children might find things more difficult for lots of reasons, and how do we support those children? So the children on the margins for lots of different reasons. But sometimes children want to do things that are silly because it's fun as well, and I think we need to kind of acknowledge that. And I do find it sometimes problematic when I don't have an issue with trauma-informed approaches at all, so let me be clear about that. But not every child's behaviour pertains to trauma, and PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, is a very particular disorder that children may have, and adults as well, and that we have to be careful that we don't over-pathologise behaviour. And sometimes, just like being late or not doing X, Y, Z might not be because of an underlying special educational need, but because also kids are kids and humans are humans, and sometimes we want to do things that are not necessarily what others might want us to do.
Andrew, any thoughts on that? We've only got a couple of minutes left now, everyone. So Yasmin and Miss C, massive apologies for me. I'll have to do like a part 2 or something on this because we're running out of time. But go on, Andrew.
I was just going to say that other than ASD, which the role in exclusions is exaggerated, the other one is speech, language and communication difficulties, that children that have identified in that category are consistently less likely to be excluded than the average child. And despite that, there is, this often an assumption that's a key issue in leading to exclusions. Of course, after kids have been excluded or when they're doing research on young offenders, that you get a lot of screening, you get massively high rates just by the nature of screening a very atypical population. But in terms of, are the kids that are identified with these conditions more likely to be excluded, I think the popular wisdom that it's ASD, speech, language and communication that are risk factors, it isn't true. I mean, it really is that category of SEMH, and there's a few others that make a marginal difference.
Yeah. Sarah, that kind of relates to the point you made.
Yeah, no, it just because I didn't know that in terms of speech and language, it'd be great, Andrew, if you could ping me over some data pertaining to that, just so I can have a little have a little read up. That'd be really helpful.
It's the thing most hidden on the exclusions website. It's like you have to download an extra spreadsheet.
And I've got thousands of children, so if you could help me out, Andrew, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I'll let you have it.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, listen, unfortunately, we have run out of time. I want to thank Andrew. I want to thank you massively for coming on. Lewis, for sticking with me and us for a full-on hour and a half there. Really, really enjoyed it, gents. Absolutely fantastic. Learned a lot, engaged a lot. And I'm thinking, actually, I don't know whether we could maybe do a part 2, Andrew and Lewis, at some point, because it was really interesting.
I appreciate you having us on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's class, mate. Thank you.
I'd certainly be up for second engagement, and Yes, thank you for having us.
I just think there's too much. I think there's too much to get through in one sort of sitting on this, because it just kind of it involves so much. Like, it's not just about exclusion; it's about the shape of education. It's about curriculum. It's about there's just so much to cover on it. So definitely we'll have a round 2. Thanks so much, everyone, for tuning in as well. We've had so many people engaging, messaging in, calling in. Sorry to people who've called in that hadn't had the chance to speak. Next time, we'll make sure that you're kind of first in line to say your piece. So thanks, everyone, and I'll be back next Monday. See you later.